So kind, I got to tell this world that you're mine. I see my nails and I tremble my thumb. I'm real nervous because the show is fun. Come on, baby, drive me crazy. Goodness gracious, quit balls of fire.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cinema Crusaders, which is Halloween Movie Madness, and we are talking In the Mouth of Madness today, but I'm sad to report on the passing of an American icon and legend, Jerry Lee Lewis, who passed today at the age of 87, and that was a clip from Great Balls of Fire, a movie from 1989 from MGM Studios and Orion Pictures, showing Jerry Lee Lewis famously setting his piano on fire when performing with Chuck Berry. This actually happened, though the song he did it to was a whole lot of shaking going on. But this is not a Jerry Lee Lewis podcast today. We just wanted to pay tribute to him, but we are continuing with Halloween Movie Madness, and we are talking about John Carpenter's classic, In the Mouth of Madness. But before we get to that, I want to introduce you to my co-host. First, I'm going to introduce you to a man who I know loves this movie. He's a big John Carpenter fan, just like me. He is a writer for Omen Comics, Revelation Comics, and also Rain Cross Press. I'm talking about none other than Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Doing great. You would have had a hard time keeping me away from this movie because this is one of my favorite John Carpenter movies of all time. It's just, between this, The Thing, and Big Trouble in Little China, it's just really, really close. And I think this is one that really works on a lot of different levels, the metatextual level, just the level of horror, and then, just about everything that Sam Neill brings to the whole role of John Trent, and the commentary on madness and all the rest of it. There's just a lot to unpack.
Now, I also want to say, give a shout out to Lance Lucero. He is not with us again, but he is doing sound and audio for his latest movie, Waiting for LeGros, I think is the one he is working on right now. So we wish him the best. We can't wait till he's back, but we fully understand. Lance is out there and he's created content for us all to enjoy. So best of luck, Lance. And we can't wait till you're with us again. And we hope you're killing it. I also want to give a shout out to Jeff, Dr. Fate Bracey. He was with us, but unfortunately, I think Sutter Kane keeps getting him and attacking his technology. So if Jeff joins us again and is able to get with us, we will bring him in. But until then, Steve and I are going to tag team this wonderful movie. So, the movie we're talking about, In the Mouth of Madness from 1994. This is John Carpenter's final installment in his Apocalypse trilogy. It started with The Thing, correct? Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve? Yep. And then went to Prince of Darkness, which we have also covered on this show. So we have covered The Thing and Prince of Darkness, and now we're kind of in the final installment of his Apocalypse trilogy, In the Mouth of Madness. My opinion, right before we go to Steve for his first thoughts on this movie, is that I think this is one of John Carpenter's best films. I think that it probably has the best cast of any movie he has. And I say that knowing that he has had some damn fine actors and actresses in his movie. I'm thinking of movies like Escape from New York or Big Trouble in Little China, or even John Carpenter's Vampires. So I think there were some great casts in those movies. But this movie is just up and down across the board. Just a wonderful cast. I think the writing is absolutely wonderful. And then John Carpenter, I think, is at the top of his game in this film. It's legitimately scary. Carpenter's music is on point. The film is absolutely beautiful. I think it's absolutely wonderful. So I can't wait to dive into it. But before we do that, I want to kick it over to Steve. What are your first thoughts on this movie? What do you think about John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness?
Yeah, I think you pretty much started it off well, I think, because this is definitely one of Carpenter's best films that he's ever done. I think he saved his best for last when it came to the Apocalypse trilogy. And I will also agree that this is really one of his best casts. But the amazing thing is like a lot of these characters are minor roles, and yet you get some really well-known people in them. You get John Glover for like 5 minutes. You get David Warner. The late great David Warner, who I've loved as Ra's al Ghul, and John Arenicus from Baldur's Gate 2, and a lot of other things. As the psychiatrist, you even get, no kidding, Anakin Skywalker as the delivery boy on the bike. So you get a lot of really, really well-known guys, including people like obviously Charlton Heston and
are you saying
that was Casey and people like that?
That was Hayden Christensen on the bike.
That was Hayden Christensen on the bike.
Wow.
Yes, that is Anakin Skywalker. Yes.
And we can't forget, get your hands off me, you damn dirty ape, for about 5 to 10 minutes of the movie as well. Mr. Charlton Heston is in the movie also.
Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Although it would be really interesting to see Moses take on Sutter Kane, but that's a different movie. But this is one of those movies that I really, really enjoy, because I think it speaks, especially if you're a writer, this movie speaks to you, because the writing process is exactly at the core of this movie, because the villain is the writer. So you have a character fighting against the writer who created him, and that's the plot. Like, this rogue character is trying not to do what his writer tells him, and I'm just like, if you've been a writer and you know how characters are when they get really strong, this will speak to you. But even if you're not, it's such a great horror film, and it really gets the Lovecraftian elements down really very well. And I will also add, as one other thing, John Carpenter was a friend of Stephen King's. In fact, he worked on Stephen King's Christine. So the Stephen King references are all very knowing and loving, and just like playful jabs between Carpenter and his old friend, and it's great.
I think we're going to get back to that point about the writing process and everything, because there's some cool stuff in there that I want to hit on, but that's kind of a side conversation. But before we do that, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Jeff. You all know him. You love him. He is an artist. He is a writer. He's part of Raincross Press. He also has his own universe that he writes stuff that includes Mr. Happy. He is probably the hardest working man in show business that I know, anyway.
I killed James Brown to get that title.
Yes, he did. And I was so glad to have him here. And my wife has a light up umbrella over there, which is kind of freaking me out a little bit, because it looks like a jellyfish is about to eat my wife. So anyway, I want to welcome him, Jeff. And I'm glad Sutter King didn't get you. So what were you going to say?
I have been beyond the gulfs of time and space. I have seen the immutable and the ineffable. And I have returned, and I can see.
Outstanding.
He sees you.
And on that note, I'm signing off, because now I'm officially scared. So we are doing first thoughts on In the Mouth of Madness. So both Steve and I have given our first thoughts on it, and I want to kick it over to you. What are your initial thoughts on In the Mouth of Madness before we get into this thing in some detail?
This is very much what I said on Twitter. This is the best Lovecraft adaptation of a movie that was never actually a Lovecraft adaptation until very recent years. Until I saw movies like The Call of Cthulhu, done by the H.P. Lovecraft Society, and their follow-up, The Whisperer in Darkness. And there was also I forget the name of it right now, but
there was The Color Out of Space that was done a couple years ago.
I was going to get to that. I was going to get to that. That's the only big budget one that really gives you the right kind of feel. And of course, there was a comic book movie made up of a graphic novel, The Dreams of the Unknown Kadath, and the writer author of that translated all of his artwork into Flash animation, which was very good. So those are my top picks for faithful adaptations. Everything else is middling to kind of bad.
I would give honorable mention just because I'm a huge fan of this, and you're going to probably know what I'm talking about. a brief glimpse of the Ogdru Jihad that we get in the Hellboy movie by Guillermo del Toro, which was stolen straight out of Seed of Destruction. So
no, he totally, he's obviously been very influenced by it. Del Toro's all about like the tentacles and the things. So like when you look at the works of Hellboy as well, you see lots of
Mignola's very Lovecraftian as well.
Very Lovecraftian. Absolutely. So it's all there, and so for a very long time, as I said, until recent years, this was my ultimate fanboy Lovecraft film. Oh, I'd also like to mention the recent film The Void, which is an exceptional piece of Lovecraftian horror. So yeah, some people have been stepping up in the recent decade or so. So it's good to see that, because this film held the top spot for the longest time in my heart, and they get so much right. Carpenter not only pays homage to Stephen King throughout the series, but the town of Hobbs End kind of references, Maine where he lives and places like that. There's all kinds of cute little things in there. Like Hob is an old term for the devil. You have hobgoblins, so like devil goblins, things like that. The end.
The hotel owner is Mrs. Pickman, a reference to Pickman's model.
Pickman's model, indeed. And some passages that we get in the film are directly quoted in not always proper sequence, but just not to be completely plagiarized. But again, when Sam Neill looks into the rift, some of that is lifted from various Lovecraftian works, as well as some of the passages that he reads himself, like Rats in the Walls and other things. And even the titles of the books that Sutter Kane has written, are all references to like the Hobbs End horror, like the Dunwich horror. I forget one is called The Haunter, and something references The Haunter in the Dark. They all have a direct line of connective tissue to the works of Lovecraft. So it's all there, and it is wonderfully freaky deaky, and I love this film to pieces.
Awesome. And I will say, as long as we're giving a shout out to Lovecraft, it always amazes me that there are quite a few people who are horror fans who have never heard of Lovecraft. And it's like, pretty much he, along with Poe and some other writers, there's quite a few. There, at least half a dozen, if not more, that we could name that are foundational. But I think that he is one of them that's foundational. Not only that, it goes across different genres. So, if you're a video game fan, there was a great game called Call of Cthulhu that had a unique madness system built into it, a video game. Pick that up, check it out. It's creepy. It's
Dark
scary.
Corners of the Earth.
Yep.
Drowned City.
Yeah. You actually go through Innsmouth in that game, and you fight Dagon at one point.
Yeah, and there are some board games out there, some card games out there. Lots of good stuff based on Lovecraft. So go check it out.
And of course, the Call of Cthulhu RPG.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, there's some great stuff out there. They're great fun, great ways to experience Lovecraft in different aspects. Even things that that you wouldn't expect, like Hero Smash Up is a card game that my son and I play sometimes, and it's just pure crazy zany fun. But there's a special add-on deck that's Cthulhu that you can add in as well. So, there's just cool stuff like that. So there's stuff out there. You can find it. It's in the zeitgeist, and you'll be surprised once you get exposed to Lovecraft how much that you know without knowing. So
it's probably the fact that more people have heard the name Cthulhu than they have Lovecraft.
Absolutely.
The creation has superseded the creator.
Cthulhu Fatan.
Yeah, probably. So let's get to. Gosh, there's so much to talk about this film. I'm certain we're going to go over because there are some things I think I definitely want to hit on. But we talked a little bit about it, and I'm going to let Steve kick it off here. But I want to go around and I want to talk about the cast of this film because I think, this film goes from strength to strength. I think it's strong in almost every way, and it's a damn shame, in my opinion, that it did not do well with the critics or at the box office, but it's got the following it deserves now. So, that is one thing I could say for it. But the cast of this film, is just ginormous. And we were talking a little bit about it before, but I really want to get into it in some more depth because from top to bottom, you just have wonderful, wonderful actors and actresses in this film. So with that, I know who I want to talk about, but I'm going to kick it over to Steve and let him kick this off to get us started on this discussion of the cast in the film. So without any further ado, Steve, take it away.
Okay. This movie has like a lot of great actors. I've already, covered some of them. David Warner, obviously, Charlton Heston, even Hayden Christensen for a little bit, but you also get a lot of other people. Some of them are Carpenter mainstays like Peter Jason. Peter Jason was in They Live. He was in Prince of Darkness. He was in, a number of other things with Carpenter as well, I believe. You get Bernie Casey, who you really saw in a lot of 80s movies, and he always kind of shows up and he does his thing and he walks off. I was really also impressed with Julie Carmen as Linda Stiles, the book editor. She's very good. And of course, we can't forget Jürgen Prochnow as Sutter Kane. And oh my God, even though he only shows up very briefly and sporadically, the appearances he makes, he is very powerful. His presence pretty much takes over the entire movie in many respects because everything is about Sutter Kane. Everything's about where he's gone, what he's doing, what's become of him, and what his plans are. For the future, and we see all of these things, as Sam Neill as John Trent goes and finds him, and then has to escape from Hobbs End once he gets there, and he realizes, how crazy everything has gone. But I will say, but the key performance I think is Sam Neill. I don't think you can take anything away from him. I think this is probably his best performance, or one of his best performances. I put this up with Event Horizon in terms of favorite Sam Neill performances, because it is really that good. I mean, he goes from being this very cynical, disbelieving character, who doesn't trust anything. And then he just gradually, his sanity starts slipping, as he encounters all of these crazy things, as he reads the book and the Sutter Kane books, and as they start messing with his head. And then later on, he goes to Hobbs End and he sees these things he can't account for and he can't rationalize and can't explain. And then you just started to see him completely slip. And then by the time you get to the did you know blue is my favorite color scene, I mean, you get probably one of the best Sam Neill freakouts I have ever seen. I mean, the physical acting alone carries it beyond Neill having to say anything. But I think some of it is that the character's very well written, and some of it is that Sam Neill is just an outstanding performer, and he just managed to keep your attention throughout the entire movie. He's always been very charismatic and very skilled, but I think this is one of his finest performances, career high.
Absolutely. I think Sam Neill is, I'm not going to say he's criminally underrated, but I do think he's underrated as a performer, and his versatility and range as a performer as well. I mean, you think that he's gone from such roles as Dr. Alan Grant in Jurassic Park to the doctor, I can't forget his name, in Event Horizon, to John Trent in this movie. Yeah, Dr. Weird. And he brings something different every time, but it's unmistakably Sam Neill as well. He's just a very, very good, I think, actor as an actor. I think that would be fair to say. I think that's a good way to describe him. Jeff, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the cast of this movie, In the Mouth of Madness?
The cast is, of course, really, really strong. It's such a hodgepodge of faces that you would recognize, even if you don't always know their names, unless you're a movie buff. When you see people like Ben Casey and, of course, Peter Jason, you're like, oh, yeah, I've seen those guys in a million things. And Carpenter does have a nice habit, as I guess a number of directors do. They have their favorites, and they like to work with them again and again when you have that sort of good chemistry. And, for instance, Carpenter would work again with Sam Neill on Memoirs of an Invisible Man, where he plays a very intense government agent trying to capture the formula of invisibility via Chevy Chase. So that's a pretty exciting action thriller there. But yeah, and it's such a good cast, and they play this throughout, from very small roles, very large roles. I mean, like Peter Jason's only in the film for one very brief scene, but it's a terrific scene for him. Like you can see this guy is guilty as hell. He's sweating up a storm, and he sells it. He totally sells it. It's very believable. And so when you get to the bigger pieces, everything feels so legitimate because they've taken the time to cast people who are very, very good, even for small roles. And like as we know, getting Charlton Heston in there for like maybe 5-10 minutes of screen time tops. And of course, Charlton flipping to Heston. What are you going to do? He's Charlton Heston. He's going to kill it. I was particularly everybody can go on and on about Sam Neill, of course. I absolutely adore his crazy look at the beginning of the film, where his eyes are just bugging out of their sockets and he's screaming how he's not insane and apologizing for the balls. It was a lucky shot.
That is awesome. I love that line.
I love the Carpenters.
Yeah. I love Julie Carmen because her character is deeply invested in the mythology of this world because she is an editor. She's read all the Sutter Kane books. It's been her job. It's been an intellectual exercise. But when she gets into the world, she realizes way before Trent does. And she gets there because she's already got a little bit of a philosophy. She starts off early in the film talking about a philosophy of like a reality being subjective, it being defined by the will of those who live within it. So she's already a little open to that idea. And to watch her realize what's going on, she gets it. She gets it quickly. And because she knows the material, whereas Sam Neill, Trent has to be drawn kicking and screaming into the admission that this is all happening. So I enjoyed going back and watching this film. I haven't watched it in a couple of years, so watching her performance, and whereas Sam has this, Trent has this denial, and this violent denial, which ends up being just a real breakdown by acceptance. Julie's character, Styles, she is dumbstruck. And watching her just kind of start affecting this 1,000-yard stares, and it reminds me very much when I think of the writing of Lovecraft, this creeping horror of knowledge that once you have seen the unseeable, the unknowable, that you can't escape it. It forever haunts you, and you can see her like once you get to the road trip to Hobbs End, she knows what the deal is, even though she's trying to hold things together. And there's this lovely line where like she's after Kane has baptized her in his book, if you will, she comes back and she's just wailing to Trent, I'm losing myself. I'm losing myself. And it's a foregone conclusion. And it's so good just watching this creeping dread come upon her.
She's very, very good. I agree. Mm-hmm. I will say, before I get into two people that I definitely wanted to mention, I think one of the things that speaks so highly for John Carpenter is the fact that so many high quality actors and actresses are willing to work for him, even if it's in small parts.
Yeah.
But from anywhere from, Kurt Russell, James Woods, Charlton Heston, Sam Neill, Kurt Russell numerous times, it's like
Donald Pleasance.
Pleasance. Yes. It's just how many times has this man had just unbelievably great actors and actresses in films, and sometimes they were films with not a lot of budget. Now I think this movie had a fairly large budget based on who released it compared to some of his other films, but still, I don't think any John Carpenter film was ever a huge blockbuster film, except for maybe Escape from LA. I think had a pretty good budget, but and
which seemed to have been to its detriment.
Yeah, so I think that says a lot about John Carpenter himself. Now, the two people that I really want to mention, because I think you guys hit on most of them, first is I do want to touch on the fact that scene that you were talking about, and I forget the guy's name right off the top of my head. Let me look real quick.
What was the scene?
Bernie Casey and Peter Jason with Sam Neill.
Yeah.
Just incredibly well-written scene. And I want to talk about the writing in this because I think the writer deserves a shout out all himself. I mean, I think this is an incredibly well-written film. But Sam Neill and all of the actors in that scene, Bernie Casey and Peter Jason, do such a good job playing their parts in order to establish Sam Neill's character. And that first glimpse we get of Sam Neill establishes his character for the whole movie. And I think it's just incredibly well acted and well directed. However, there are two other actors. The first one we meet very early on, and that is John Glover's character, Saperstein.
Yeah.
John Glover is one of my favorite actors, as far as a character actor and a whole host of different things.
Oh, yeah. If you'll excuse me, Saperstein is actually a reference to Rosemary's Baby.
Lionel Luthor.
Yeah.
So, John Glover has been in tons of stuff like Tales from the Crypt. Has been in a number of different episodes. But as far as a character actor who is just top notch, can come in here and give you a performance without peer, I think John Glover is one of the best. And I think he steals the scenes he's in again in this episode. He's creepy in all of the right ways. You're never quite sure if he's just insane or if he, we find out later when he asks the psychiatrist as he's leaving, he goes, "Are you a Sutter Kane reader?" So you're like, has this guy already started to turn? You're never quite sure with him, and it's brilliant. And it's all because of the way he acts. So I just love his performance in this film, even though he's not in a lot of it. And the other guy I'm gonna mention isn't in the movie more than 5 or 10 minutes. He is Mr. Vigo from Ghostbusters 2. But he also plays Simon, the father of one of the children in this movie, and he's going to end up taking his own life. It's Prince Wilhelm von Hornburg. He's got a fairly small part, but a very important part where he's a bar owner who tells Sam Neill's character to leave at one point, and then when he sees him again, he says it's too late and gives a nice short soliloquy before he offs himself. But it's haunting. And it's powerful. And, this guy's story, if you don't know it, go check it out. He was a professional. He was born in East Germany, was a professional wrestler until late in his life, and then became an actor and had a very short acting career, relatively speaking. But he was an incredible actor as well, a very talented man. And I love his performance in this. And that's the kind of character actors that are in this. So even guys that were people that were in very small parts were absolutely amazing. Another person I have to point out real quick is Frances Bay as Mrs. Pickman.
Yes, she's great.
She's an amazing lady. And this is a lady who is supremely talented. She could play characters that were very comedic as well. But she's absolutely creepy as hell in this movie. But one of the things I remember her from where she's absolutely hilarious is she plays Happy Gilmore's grandmother, and she's hilarious in that one, but including wearing a Gene Simmons mask in that movie, so she was a very incredibly talented lady as well. So the cast was really, really good. So with that said, let's get into the writing and, in this, as we talk about this, go ahead and talk a little bit about the parts of the movie that you like, without me going through the whole plot, because I don't want to waste a ton of time on that because there's so much I think to talk about here. But I do want to hear what you guys think of the writing. And I have the name in my head, but I want to double check so I get it right. This guy is a film executive, but he is a very good Michael DeLuca. Yeah. So Michael DeLuca wrote this. I want to get your thoughts on the writing and the plot of this film. And I'm going to start with Jeff. What do you think about this?
I'll tell you, I remember in the Twitter chat, you guys were calling this, I think maybe it's Steve calling this Carpenter's masterpiece.
Yep, and I said that.
Okay, it was you. So but if you got to have a good foundation to build upon. And DeLuca absolutely gives Carpenter this foundation to work from. It's a really solid story, and this guy clearly have paid attention to what Lovecraft was putting down. I have on my bookshelf the entire catalog of all Lovecraft's short stories and a couple of collected volumes. I've read them numerous times. I frequently listen to them as audiobooks while I'm creating artwork and things, so I'm pretty steeped in this stuff. And he really gets it. He hits all the points. This is one of the most fun depictions of cosmological madness I've seen until we get to films like Event Horizon. Coincidentally, Samuel once again. He seems to be good for end of the world scenarios. With Damien and Event Horizon, In the Mouth of Madness. He's really good about that sort of thing. But yeah, it's I saw Steve, one of you two talking about how the setups for everything is so good when you find out the axe wielding madman was Sutter Kane's agent, and then at the end of the film, you find out that he was trying to stop the apocalypse because he had read to the end of the book or close to the end of the book.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, it's such a great, just a layering of things, a little foreshadow that builds and builds, and it pays off. And that's one of the things I love best about this. Everything it gets set up pays off, and it pays off so well. And the focus of the story, of course, being Sam Neill and his journey from being a atheist or agnostic, if you will, to a true believer, because this is a story of a new religion. And Sam is going to be its prophet, whether he wants to or not. John Trent becomes the prophet of this new age, this new religion that's coming. Sutter Kane even calls his final work his Bible. Mm-hmm. And and of course, there's a religious allegory all throughout the film. There's mentions of God and the devil and things that lie beyond, and the unknowable. But it's even the church, even though it has a depiction of the Archangel Michael fighting what appears to be a devil, it's described as one of these things from beyond. So it's all set up beautifully, and that is not an easy thing to do it without being heavy-handed or cheesy. And I got to give all credit to Mr. DeLuca, because he writes a very tight, well-paced, well-plotted script, and he writes very good characters within the context of this world that they've created here.
Now, it's interesting you say that, because I was going to wait, but I'm going to mention this and then go to Steve. Right or wrong, and for good or ill, and I think ill, DeLuca didn't write a whole lot after this. He wrote one other movie, and I'm going to get to that in a second. And
what a shame.
One episode for Star Trek Voyager, and that was it. And he became an executive. And I think the lesson we can take from that is you can see from this movie that he's a very good writer, and that it was tight. And unfortunately, this movie didn't do very well. And then the next movie he worked on. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I was about to say, I think I know where you're going with this, and this is probably why, when I think of examples of how when you're hot, you're hot. When you're not in Hollywood. Dan Aykroyd, his very first directorial feature, crushed him, and he never directed again. Nothing but trouble. And I think that's a pretty malign film, but in Hollywood is absolutely merciless.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is the next movie he worked on, he was a writer on this movie as well. I don't think it's a very good movie, but there were 3 writers on this film. It was notorious for tons of studio interference in it, and he got credit for part of the writing because he wrote the story. And I don't think the story was a problem. I think the dialogue was a problem, and the studio interference was a problem.
Yeah, the story's not the same as having the polished script.
He wrote Judge Dredd, the Sylvester Stallone movie.
Not his fault.
Yeah, no, that's not his fault. I mean, the foundation was okay. That was not it. It was the execution.
I'll say this in his defense. I was reading an article by Frank Miller when he got into writing scripts for Hollywood. He wrote the 2nd and 3rd RoboCop movies, and it pushed him out of Hollywood for a long time, because he said, being a writer is the worst occupation in Hollywood, because everybody, including the dog, the stray dog walking by, can come along and take a dump on your work.
And so, yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's a shame, because you look at how good he is, and I don't know the man. I've never watched an interview, but you get the feeling that once he had those 2 failures under his belt and got offered a chance to be an executive, a producer, and then eventually he became a studio executive, and he's associated with some really great movies like Moneyball and things like that, greenlighting those and financing them and producing them. I think he never went back, and I think we lost a talent. So
It's a real shame because I will say the opening scene in Judge Dredd with Stallone, I think is fantastic. It's the rest of the movie that sucks. That opening sequence is Judge Dredd. And then, Sly had to have his helmet off the rest of the doggone film, and the executives and the producers and Sly doing all this. So, yeah.
Well, not only that, they brought in two different writers to write dialogue on one script.
Yeah.
So,
terrible.
Anyway.
It's hard to take it seriously.
Steve, what do you think about the writing and the plot of the film?
Yeah, I think that this is really, really good, and for a lot of the reasons that Jeff said. I also will add that I think that this movie gets cosmic horror perfectly well, which is basically based on this existential dread where you kind of know, your place in the universe, or you become aware of it, and then you realize how insignificant you are compared to these horrible things that are bearing down on you. And it does this in a very interesting way, by basically kind of realizing, you're not in control of the universe. There's a writer that is pretty much running your entire life, and that really hits Sam Neill's character, because he's somebody who really wants no strings attached to him. He wants to live on his own terms. He even basically says that, I'm going freelance because I don't want anybody to be the boss of me. And then he realizes that there's a boss of you, and you just don't want to admit it. And then after a while, you're just sort of forced to admit that this creator being, or is pretty much micromanaging like every step of your life. And even when you don't want to do something, he writes everything so that you do exactly what he tells you, whether you want to or not.
There's this wonderful quote that H.P. Lovecraft wrote horror stories for atheists, and that's what you get when you get cosmic horror, because your place is you're a speck of dust in the eye of the universe.
Yeah, and all you can do is survive.
Yeah,
and
all you can do is survive and try not to go mad.
I think that DeLuca tackles the no strings on me dilemma much better than another group of writers / directors who tried to do it, the Wachowskis, when they did it in Matrix 2, and they just fumbled all of it, But I think it's a great topic to handle. I just think that they bundled the whole thing, trying to put it this over complicated dialogue, when really you look at the dialogue between Sutter Kane and John Trent, and it's perfect.
Yeah, I mean that. The
first
movie
I was
really
telling Mike Nunnally when we discussed Matrix 2 that I had to go back and watch the scene with the architect like several times just to understand what he was trying to say. I mean, that's kind of a problem.
Yeah, the Matrix 2 and beyond just became philosophical masturbation at that point.
Yeah. And it became too complicated. I'm not going to say, I'm a writer, obviously. I'm not going to say that words are bad, but sometimes too many words can be a bad thing. So,
too many notes.
It just becomes word salad.
Exactly. I'm sorry to interrupt. So, Steve, keep going.
So the whole idea with cosmic horror and basically the whole insignificance of it, and you really do get that sense of insignificance throughout this movie. I mean, especially the whole bit where the entire world goes blue, and and he has there's nothing he can do about it. And all he can do is embrace being the madness, because otherwise he'll end up even worse mentally, which is a pretty scary thing. It's like he has to retreat into madness just to be able to cope with the craziness that really exists. And I just love the whole theme about this, where he's talking with Styles early on, and she's like, well, what ends up happening if you're the same person and reality itself is insane? What do you become at that point? And this is a movie that attempts to address that, and I think it does so very, very well. I think Sam Neill's character arc is beautifully done on every level. I think that the setting of Hobbs End is really well realized. I mean, you really get the sense of this mashup of Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft, all of these sorts of things. I just love the meta narrative when it comes to how the writing process actually works. Styles is gone. Oh, that okay. I guess he must have run her out.
Run her out.
I'm just and it's like that I totally get that, and it's just, and you kind of left wondering. It's like, did he have control all along? And all of this is the story world, that is being manipulated by Sutter Kane to start with? Or is it really that he didn't have as much power until the book started spreading, and then and then that's when he really became a god? It's a very interesting question, and I just love the way it phrases that.
And there's that question is like, because he's claiming he's doing this for these great old ones, these outer gods, but then he proclaims himself God on the bus. So like, what's the truth?
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. I'm going to wrap up this writing segment by highlighting some things kind of underneath, that DeLuca brings out in his writing, which I think are fascinating. Because, on the surface, this is a very entertaining horror movie based on Lovecraft. And then, you get underneath the surface and there's even more Lovecraft. But when you get really deep into it, there is some, to use Jeff's term, philosophical masturbation as well. But I don't think he's masturbating. I think he's actually highlighting some very complex philosophical arguments here about society and the nature of truth. One of the things that is amazing, and this comes from Styles' mouth, is that she speaks a truth for this world, for this movie, which comes straight out of Nietzsche, which I think is amazing to combine with Lovecraft, which is that truth is defined based on what the masses say it is. That's a gross oversimplification of how he defines truth, but
kind of the will to power.
Yeah, and that, and then DeLuca brilliantly turns that concept, the Nietzschean concept, and Nietzsche I think is kind of horrifying anyway when you read it, but then turns that into true horror by saying, who is to say what madness is, because the mad become the sane when they become the majority, and how lonely will it be when you are the last truly sane person in a world full of madness? How Lovecraftian of that is that? How Nietzsche is that? Quite honestly, how Dante, not Dante, the Prince, Machiavellian, to a certain extent as well. So I think it's really fascinating that DeLuca brought these very high concepts and wrote them into the script as subtext. But if you go down into the depths, there are some really metaphysical examinations of the nature of truth, the nature of religion, the nature of our society. What is proper and improper in society? Once a society goes insane, you may think you're the sanest person in the world, but once sanity becomes insanity, you become the person on the outside.
I think he might have cribbed a little bit about that from God knows, can't remember his name all of a sudden. Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, where the last completely human man on Earth finds out he's become this boogeyman for this new society of vampire-like people who have arisen.
Right.
And the sane is insane now. He's perceived as the monster, whereas he's been perceiving them as the monster. And his final thoughts are like, I am legend. He realizes I'm going to be this story told to children. I'll be the boogeyman under your bed. If you don't do right, this human is going to find you and stake you in the daylight. Well, and so you get this situation here as well.
I think it's a common concept. It's one that's written about a lot in science fiction and in horror. I mean, another example that I could point out before we move on is Brave New World, where the noble savage who is acting in a way that some, including myself, would consider as moral, is immoral in this Brave New World. His actions and the way he reacts to things are immoral in this new world. So, sane, insane, moral, immoral, true, false. These polarities take on different meanings depending on what the prevailing wisdom is. It can be dangerous when you get too far down in that, because that's where relativism lies,
But I also like this philosophical discussion of reality they have, whereas there's ideas out there now like the simulation theory, and we've discovered that if you observe a scientific experiment, the fact of observation will change things in the quantum level. So there is, your will, if you will, affecting reality on a massively microscopic level. And if you take that to an extent, Sutter Kane has this wonderful line about saying, this world would be a paradise, but not enough people believe. If you all believed in your Bible, more people believe in my works than in your Bible, and that's why I'm going to triumph.
Yeah, I mean,
and so he points out how many languages that he's been reprinted in, so
18.
Everybody around the world will be able to read it.
Yeah, and
there's a movie coming out.
Yeah. But these are universal concepts that have been talked about for a long time. I mean, this is from Bill and Ted, but Socrates really said this to one degree or another, which is
Socrates.
The only true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. Well, that's kind of a play on the same thing, where there is no true wisdom except in knowing that you don't know what it is. So it's like, okay, then what's true and what's not true, and then it just begs the question, and then you get into your philosophical masturbation, as Jeff so eloquently put it, But I do think that these are great concepts to examine, and the fact that it's in this movie makes the movie that more special, just that much more special to me.
Yeah, so, and I will say that this is like the second time I believe that Carpenter has really played with the nature of reality as a director. The other one being They Live. So it seems like this was like the kind of script that was speaking to him at that point.
Well, I would say that he even played with the nature of reality of Prince of Darkness to a certain extent.
Oh, yeah, true. Yeah, he was very much ahead of his time, I will say.
And for those who don't know, this film is the third in what he calls his Apocalypse trilogy, starting with The Thing, moving on through Prince of Darkness, and ending here within the Mouth of Madness. What I look at is with The Thing, the catastrophe is averted. With the Prince of Darkness, it's a bit up in the air as whether or not we succeed and we win. And here in the Mouth of Madness, we fail. The world is all ashes and ruin.
We're going to get back to that on final thoughts because I want to see.
But is it really the world?
How you guys?
Or is it the world that Sutter Kane wrote about?
Yeah, for all we know, Sutter Kane is sitting in his own little loony bin, and like this is the world he's fabricated in his head.
Yeah. Real quick, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but I will kick this off, and then we'll go around the horn, and then there are some philosophical questions I want to ask you, gentlemen. Music. So I don't know, most people will probably know this, but John Carpenter usually writes the music for most of his movies. And I usually enjoy it to one degree or another. I have to say, from the opening credits to the ending of the film, and then the credits that take us out, the outro, John Carpenter's music is completely on point and just an incredible soundtrack in this film. That's my opinion. I mean, and I don't have much more analysis other than that, but immediately just watching that intro with showing the books being printed, and John Carpenter always brings this heavy synthesizer, and usually it has a good beat to it, but just the heavy notes and that leads in, and then the synthesizer music, it just hits all of the notes perfectly and gives you that sense of dread. So it's kind of, if I had to say a combination of movies, it's almost like a combination of the music he does for The Thing, and the music that he does for They Live. And it's kind of a combination of the two with a little bit of Big Trouble in Little China thrown in to a certain extent. But it completely works. And then other movies that he's done that I think were just as successful, like Vampires as well. But I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on the music score that John Carpenter did for this film, because I think it adds a lot to the film. And I was curious to hear what you guys thought. And I'll go ahead and hit Steve first and go to Jeff.
Yeah, I don't think I have a whole lot to say about this. I will say this is probably, I want to say maybe like my third favorite Carpenter piece, the intro, because I really love how he really kind of hits like a hard rock tone, going in, which is really weird for a horror movie. And yet it really, really works. I think it really kind of suits the tone of what he's doing. And, kind of ending with the outro on a similar vein. I think a lot of that really works. And yet, when it starts getting into the creepy stuff, he does get back into sort of like the creepy notes. It's not like Halloween's-ish, but it does kind of have that feel where it's like, yeah, I could see where this would fit a Lovecraftian story. It has kind of a Lovecraftian sound to it. I can't really explain it better than that. But I will say, yeah, there is some similarity to Big Trouble in Little China, although I like that one a little bit better. I don't know. Some of it's just the Pork Chop Express and how good that is. And it's not as iconic as Halloween, but I think that it is one among his best. I would say certainly like maybe top 3 or 4 in terms of the scores that he's been able to do. And each one he makes sounds a little bit different. I mean, they don't sound the same at all. And you usually get these musical scores that are very unique, kind of stay with you after a while, and you really kind of enjoy them, just for being musical scores rather than, necessarily going with a movie because they're just that good.
Even I would hypothesize that even what I consider one of his weaker films that I still watch on occasion, and I don't think is a bad film, Ghosts of Mars, has an enjoyable soundtrack to listen to, and his music adds something to the film, which is always a plus, in my opinion. So, Jeff, what did you think of the music in this movie?
I vehemently disagree. You guys are wrong once again.
All right.
The rock and roll is a terrible, terrible choice for the intro and the outro, especially.
Listen to you, the hot take.
It just immediately, I'd forgotten about that's how the movie starts, as far as like musically, and I was just kind of like, what? No, this is not the music for existential dread. This is not the music for Lovecraftian nightmares. This is not fitting for this. I had to kind of gear up and get back into the movie once the credits stopped rolling and the film started getting on. He does get better as things go, but I think he missed a chance to be really eerie in a completely new way. This movie, putting this rock soundtrack, sadly, it reminds me too much of things that did happen in the 80s and will happen now, where like what's the popular, even though this is Carpenter's own creations, what's the popular metal band? Oh, let's MCU's like made AC/DC hot, so like let's throw Thunderstruck, on top of this movie soundtrack. It doesn't matter if it's horror, comedy, whatever. Like that's the thing. This music has gotten popular. He handles things much better in films like Christine, which opens with a wonderful rock and roll riff, because that music by George Thorogood is very much in the flavor and style of the 50s, when the 58 Plymouth Fury was produced, and the music throughout that he creates for that has a lot of homages to music of the period. So he crafts that incredibly well to fit that particular film, and he's usually a genius at that sort of thing. But like for me, I was actually surprised that there were times I was just a little put off by some of the music, and especially the intro and outro. I was like, that doesn't work for me at all. That is not the way to build terror. It's not the way to build suspense. And unlike again, going back to Christine, where you see that car from that time period, and even though this is a more modern piece of music, like I said, it's done in that sort of style, and that works out beautifully. Even though that wasn't a Carpenter crafted piece right there, he scored the rest of the film, obviously. But yeah, it just didn't set the right tone. I want something that's going to, in my mind, relate to the subject matter a lot better than that. And rock and roll is not the way to go when you want to talk about Cthulhu.
That's interesting. I think we're going to have to agree and disagree on that one, because like
you're just wrong, guys. Just accept it. You're wrong.
Nah, I think it actually works for the fake out part of it, because at first you don't really expect things to go quite in that direction, and I think that for the starting tone of like the detective stuff earlier on, I think it better fits that stuff.
See, that's better.
And then with the outro, for me, with him laughing and falling into insanity and presumably beginning the change, I love that it to me, the way it spoke to me is that it's showing the manic level that
I wish he'd done something.
At.
If he's going to go there, I wish he'd done something far more discordant and like nerve jangling to really upset you, sonically, as you're, watching. Like, this is not a happy story at all.
Okay,
but that's where I would have gone.
Okay. All right. Well, see, this is why you have to tune into Cinema Crusaders, because we do disagree at times. We have some great discussions on it, and Jeff tells us when we're wrong and that we need to just agree with him and go on our way. But no, he doesn't say that. He just tells us
Alien versus Predator is still a good movie.
I do like
you
Alien
can say
versus
that.
Predator.
We just don't have to listen. So.
All right. Couple philosophical discussions, and then we're going to do final thought question, and we'll wrap this up. So, first philosophical discussion, and now I just completely blank. Oh my god, I can't believe that my brain did this.
It's Sutter Kane.
Yeah, it does have.
He's writing you out.
Wow.
He doesn't want you to expose his truths.
I cannot believe that I just blanked on this completely. I'm embarrassed. I completely blanked on what I was going to do.
Nature, reality.
Yeah, I'm having a senior
free
moment. Will. Sutter Kane got me.
Well, was anybody actually real?
Let's do that one first. That was one of the ones. So I'm going to go Jeff first on this one. But based on this movie, one of the questions you guys brought up that I did want to hit on is, do you think this is what happens at the end of the movie is truly a reflection of reality? What are your thoughts on how this movie ended up? As far as was this, we talked a little bit about it. Was this Sutter Kane actually changing reality? Was this John Trent falling into madness? Was this Sutter Kane's madness? What do you think about all that?
Okay, I think that you can definitely look at specifically the Sutter Kane's madness question is can be a bit more vague. It's a thought I had as a possibility to explain the film. You can definitely look at it one of two ways: that this indeed is legitimately real. Reality shifts. There's a paradigm shift to the horrific, and Sam Neill is left to observe this as the last potentially quote unquote human being, as not just the prophet of the new religion, but also the witness to the new age. I think that's perhaps the only reason why Kane doesn't write him into a monster or totally insane. And I never think that he's actually truly insane throughout the film. I think he is on the edge. He's struggling because he just hasn't, devolved into something completely and utterly useless as far as a character. He still has enough rational thought to explain himself to David Warner at the time. And if he breaks, if he truly goes insane, it's when he goes to the theater and, Kane is throwing it right in his face again, like, this is reality, this is reality, this is reality. And he's like, okay, I'm done. You just eat the popcorn and be happy. That sort of thing. I think the intention of the film, of Carpenter making this part of the trilogy, as I said before, I think this is the one where we lose. That Sutter Kane has been inspired by the old gods, and he has either gained power from them or perhaps even usurped it, because he is God now. So who's to say when you make a kind of maybe slightly deranged, maybe narcissistic mortal, you give him the power of God, who's to say that he doesn't decide, like, you know what, you guys are fiction too. This is my world. This is my sandbox. Screw you all. I own everything. And so I think that's the way the film is meant to go, because there is that line where he's holding back the tide momentarily so Sam can escape with his manuscript. And he's like, I can't hold them back too much longer. It's like, but the idea is to let them out. That was the whole idea. So, but once he hits the bus, Kane's in charge. And the more people who get invested in the book and the movie, the more his power grows until the world is his plaything.
I remember what my other question was going to be too. So
okay,
cool. All right.
There's definitely a case to be made that this is all Sam's madness. That he had a traumatic experience. We start off with him in an asylum, and we end with him in an asylum, and so he can be a completely unreliable narrator. But I think, from the perspective of what Carpenter wanted to achieve, this is the end of the world.
Cool. Real quick before I throw it over to Steve, I'm just going to throw my 2 cents in here because I definitely want to hear Steve's take on it. And Jeff, if you have any comments as well. After watching this movie a number of times, part of me, not all of me, part of me is convinced that this is a completely alternate reality. that has been created, and he has been sent into. And there are two things
I like that idea
that I really point to that for me. One is that when we go into Harlow's office, it's completely different.
Oh,
it's
yes.
completely different. The second thing is when he gets out and he goes to the theater, all of the names used as the actors in the film are the actual character names. So it's In the Mouth of Madness starring John Trent, Linda Stiles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
But everything else on the movie poster references the people who actually made the film. It says directed by John Carpenter, written by DeLuca, and it goes on and on.
Yeah.
Now, all those credits are legit.
Yep, but the actors' names are the actual characters.
I mean, it's on the marquee, In the Mouth of Madness with John Trent.
Yeah. So it's very interesting to me. So there's part of me that thinks that this is a completely alternate reality. That said, I want to hear what Steve's thoughts are.
That's a clever thought. I hadn't thought of it that way before.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of different ideas on what it could be. I tend to have some agreement with Jeff in the sense that I think that Carpenter's intention, was to show Sutter Kane gradually gaining power as the, book started spreading and it became a movie and, it started gaining hold. I think the idea was to show that there's nothing more dangerous than an idea being spread. And the more that the idea spreads, it's almost contagious like a virus, and people catch it. And, and this is where society starts breaking down because, you have the wrong ideas being programmed into people. And this is what turns the world insane. And I think from that perspective, it perfectly works. I think you can absolutely look at it that way and say, yeah, this is reality until Sutter Kane gets control over it. And then he can do whatever he wants with it because the universe is literally his plaything at that point. That said, I still like the idea that the whole thing is Sutter Kane writing a story and none of it happened. Like all of this was the novel that he's writing. Like, you see the novel, the book being printed and all of that. And then you start going into the events of the book as Kane wrote it. And I think a lot of this is kind of where you start seeing this. So all of this is actually the book he's wrote it. Because here's the thing. I mean, John Trent acts like a character created by Sutter Kane. In fact, there is a scene where he and Stiles are talking in the car, and he's talking about like how cynically he views humanity. And one thing that Stiles says is like, you sound a lot like Kane. Mm-hmm. Well, is it not true that writers put a lot of themselves in their characters? So, I mean, it does make a lot of sense to me that all of this was intended, as, this is essentially the world of that novel. This is a guy who is living literally in a horror novel, and the world is going insane around him. And he's depending on what kind of. I was going to say, depending on what kind of writer play the game.
Yeah, all right, Nathan, you go.
Depending on what kind of writer you are, how horrible a god you are for the people in your novel. So.
Right, Steve,
and it's also not true that a lot of times, the writers are the people who are the, most sadistic to their characters. I think it was Joss Whedon who said, "I love my characters, so I cause them pain." And look at all the pain that Sutter Kane inflicts on his character. Why? Because he wants the character to get to where he needs to go at the end of the book. And to do that, he has to deliver the manuscript.
Look what happens when Stiles tries to kiss them on the way out of town. He's like, "I gotta kiss you." And it's like, why? It's like, because it's good for the book.
Yeah.
Because that's the manipulation of character.
Yeah, he does that a number of times. Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff, his scenes with Stiles is him exerting authorial influence over her. I don't even think necessarily that it's a question of them rating the book. I think he always was in control. It's just that it becomes more and more obvious how much he's in control the more the book is spread and the more the book takes on. But I think all of it was always, you could look at it totally as this basically being the inside of a story and a character just kind of realizing that he's a character in story and then just goes insane because of that realization. Like, I'm not what I thought I was. I have no real agency. I'm a puppet in the hands of this, capricious God. That is the writer of the book.
That'd be a horrific realization. It's like it is played a little bit more for laughs with the Last Action Hero, but Arnold's character has a moment where he's like, all these terrible things kept happening to me, and I kept surviving. It didn't make sense.
And how much would you hate the people that are making these things happen in your life? And I think Last Action Hero did capture some of that.
When Arnold goes up,
absolutely.
the character goes up to Arnold and he tells him, like, you've been responsible for nothing but pain in my life.
Yeah. What Steve just said, leads right into the second question I was going to ask you. And I'll leave this off by saying, I think my novel is supposed to come out next month. And
goody.
When one of the characters had something happen to them in that movie or in that novel, I cried. I was sad. I grieved. And I think that a lot of writers feel like that, which leads into my next question. And it kind of had to do with something Sutter Kane was saying, was that I have felt this way, and you guys are both writers, so I wanted to hear your opinion on this, is that sometimes, and it has to do with the nature of creation. And I think Sutter Kane even said that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like you are not creating something, rather you are dictating something that already is real. At least it does for me. It feels like sometimes that I'm seeing something that has actually happened in the past or will happen or whatever. And I'm not saying that it really is and I've lost my mind. It just feels that way because it's so real in your imagination, because you have created these things and they're real for you and you're writing them down. And these characters become people that you speak to in your head as you write them because you are in their head dictating what they're going to do. And I think it brings some very interesting questions about the nature of creation, the nature of writing, and doing this types of things, and how you have to almost be a little bit schizophrenic in a way because you are playing multiple characters at one time when you're writing this stuff and looking at things from their points of view and things. So I wanted to hear your guys' opinions on that within the movie, first of all, but just in general. What do you think about that thought and how it was portrayed in the movie? And I'll go to Steve first.
Yeah, I think that it feels very true to the writing process. I think DeLuca is probably, talking about like maybe kind of his own writing experiences and kind of bringing them to life. And it really does come across as very real. This is one of the most real portrayals of writing in a metafictional sense. The other one that I think is another good example is a Twilight Zone episode called, I want to say, World of Difference, which is basically about this playwright, who has basically created his own love interests. And it's just, it has a lot of that same kind of reality to me, or at least that sense of the writer's experience. Yeah. So I feel like with Sutter Kane, there is a lot of that. I think you definitely see with John Trent, it's like, yeah, he's definitely an aspect of Kane's personality. And that's why he's such a strong character and why he doesn't listen to Kane, because Kane puts so much of himself in John Trent. And I feel like that really comes across. Like a lot of the other characters, it seems like, Kane controls them very easily. Like that guy who shoots himself, the guy that was the play.
Yeah, Vigo.
Yeah. Simon.
Yeah. Simon. Yeah. Is basically, he just goes and before he pulls the trigger, what does he say? I mean, he basically says, this is what I was meant to do. You can't stop me from doing this because this is what I was written to do. And so characters like that, they just are puppets and they go through the motions, but characters like Trent don't do that. Characters like Trent question what's going on. Characters like Trent disobey Kane, and Kane doesn't seem very often to take him over, or just a couple of times. So you can also tell that there is an affection that Kane has for Trent as well, which is why a lot of times he's trying to persuade him or trying to get him over to his side rather than, brute forcing, the outcome he wants, because he wants the character to do what he wants of his own free will, because that makes the story better, because that makes the story more satisfying. And so there's a lot of that element in there.
I think that's so fascinating. And I think it's true. I mean, a lot of times I think I find when you write, you find yourself a lot of times in those places where you're stuck because you want your strong characters to do something, and you can't write it that way, and so you have to find a better way to go about it, versus a throwaway character. You can do whatever the hell you want to them and get rid of them, so interesting. Jeff, what do you think?
It's definitely an interesting process because I've heard King talk about this in some of his own articles and interviews before, where like For most of the time, like if you're a writer, you might have a starting point, or you might have an ending point, or you might have your start and your end, and you work to connect those two things together in a satisfying manner. Uh, but there are times when you're writing a character or a situation, and you have this idea, and it takes on a life of its own. The characters will take on a life of its own, and I've heard writers like King and others talk about how like the character will bully you into doing what they want to do. Your ideas end up meaning nothing, and it's this weird, like you said, almost sort of schizophrenic thing where this thing that you are the author of, you are the creator of, you're kind of the god of, and it goes like, well, you know what, I'm gonna pluck the apple off that tree even though you told me not to. I'm gonna do my own thing and let's see what happens. I'm gonna roll those dice, and that can be both frightening and exciting. And I like seeing that sort of thing. I think in terms of comics, one of the best examples of that would probably be Grant Morrison's run on Animal Man. Or was it Morrison, or was it
That was Morrison, yeah. You're talking
Okay.
about when he wrote himself as the writer of the
Yeah.
of the comic.
And and King has done that. Like if you're a fan of the Dark Tower series, he writes himself into the narrative, and he meets the gunslinger and his posse. And so there's that sort of thing in where like the self-insert is real, and as long as it serves the story, and as we've all mentioned, being ourselves, we can write what we think other people are going to do. But there's always going to be an aspect of ourselves in each character, even when we're trying to get as far away from ourselves as possible. It's just like when you do acting, you try and like reference your friends or people in history, or maybe even other characters you've seen in movies, or just these kind of general stereotypes. But in order to have like this authenticity and truth, some of it is going to come from your own experience. So you're always a part of the process, and I think that's interesting here. And I like the fact that Neil, the creation, does confront the creator, and they're having this sort of debate again. This sort of gets in this sort of biblical sort of context where Abraham is arguing with the angel of the Lord about like don't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. There's got to be at least some good people there, right? And he's trying to talk God down, which is just a mind blowing concept when you think about it. And you sort of see, in some ways, a little similar thing sort of happen here. But I do think there are people in the context of the story who have a little bit more agency as they become aware that, like, okay, yeah, we're being written. Like that one poor kid who's been escaping so long, trying to escape so long. He's a little old man on a bicycle, and he's like, he won't let me leave. So there's definitely a few characters in there who, even though they're bit players, they have a little bit of extra agency, and they keep trying to get away. But it's hopeless because it's still part of the narrative. So
they're aware.
It's so metatextual. I love it.
I think they're aware. In a less serious fare, they would be the ones that break the fourth wall.
Mm-hmm.
But AKA.
I just love how they had that biker look like the crypt keeper.
Yeah. I
it's
will
kind of
say,
funny. He looked like a. If he had like the ponytail going, he looks like, even though Carpenter didn't look like this then, he looks like what John Carpenter ended up looking like in his old age.
See,
that's interesting.
I thought he looked like what Whoopi Goldberg looked like when she dressed up as that old white man in that movie. I can't remember. She's a stockbroker.
I don't know if I'm the only one who noticed this, but did you guys happen to notice that when they get into Hobbs Inn, that the car went from looking very nice and very pristine to like looking really kind of ragged and dirty?
I didn't notice that.
And like for me, that sort of symbolized you're coming into a corrupted reality.
Yeah, there's all sorts of little things like that.
Yeah, there's lots of subtleties in here.
The last thing I'll say on this topic before I go to my final question and final thoughts for everybody is that this reminds me a lot of a discussion we have a lot of times behind the scenes on sloppy spoilers, and then in front of the camera on sloppy spoilers as well, which is that we talk about how you write established characters, and people will always say, people like us will say, there's canon, there's the character would never do that. And people say, oh, they're fictional characters. You can make them do whatever you want. Yes and no. After a certain while, I think that this movie kind of highlights that characters take on aspects. They take on personality. They have ways of acting. And they're fictional. You could do whatever you want with them, but it doesn't mean that it's going to ring true. And whether it's right or wrong, whether it's schizophrenic or not, characters do start to take on a life of their own. It's, in the zeitgeist, in the author, and things like that. And I think Steve's point is really fascinating to bring up and think about in that sense. And then what Jeff was highlighting as well. So really great discussion, guys. I'm glad that we did that part. And this is one of the things I was looking forward to. So with that, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the people who say things like that don't understand. You have to understand the nature of the character. Captain America is just not going to become a serial killer because some writer thinks that'd be kind of a cool thing to explore. It's a complete anathema to the nature of the character, and that's what you have to respect, especially if you're taking on somebody else's IP.
And Batman would never
you can find a new take, but it has to be consistent with what we know of the character that's been established previously.
Yeah, it doesn't come out of the blue.
And Batman would never become Captain America. You know, he could never be a Captain America type figure. It's just not in his nature. So no matter how much he wants to fight crime and everything else, that's just not who he is. So final, this is kind of a final question, final thoughts combination here. But seeing as how this is the finale of John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, how do you think these three movies go together, if at all? Because I was trying to think of that, and I know people have theorized on this as well, and I wanted to hear what your guys' thoughts on it. And I guess I'd give my thoughts first. That's only fair.
Go ahead.
I think there is a way, it's a real stretch where you could possibly see how these are three versions of potential realities that could all feed on each other. It's like if a dark god was planning on how to destroy the world, he starts off with the Thing, trying to think of how to do with that, and it's a creature and it's taking over people and turning into those people and replacing them. And then you have Prince of Darkness, which is possessing people, and it's a dark power and has ability to control minds. And both of those fail to a certain extent. And then I think it's interesting to me, the way I like to look at it sometimes, is that the dark power, John Carpenter perfected his end of the world scenario by combining elements of both the first two movies in the Mouth of Madness.
It does end up being all about controlling the individuals
and creatures that take over people, and they turn them into creatures. So it's almost like it's almost like the first two movies were the dark power figuring out how to perfect their end of the world scenario, and where they were more successful each time, and the third time they were successful. The third time was the charm, and they combined elements of both movies into their actual end of the world scenario. And it's like theory. Yeah, so that's just kind of what I like to think of sometimes. It's not perfect. I don't think it's direct translation, but I thought it was an interesting question to end on before we say goodbye to everybody. So I wanted to hear what your guys' thoughts were. And I'm going to go to Jeff next, and then I'll end with you, Steve, if that's okay. So,
yeah. Right. Once I found out these films were what Carpenter called his Apocalypse trilogy, I tried to do what you did. I tried to come up with a thought exercise to see if I could put all of these in the same world. And ultimately, I decided I couldn't, that each of these is its own separate reality. And I'm just fine with that. But I do, as I've stated earlier, I do have my establishing idea of how, in one film, humanity gets really lucky. In another film, it's kind of up in the air because of the way the Prince of Darkness ends. Because we don't particularly know what the future is going to have to hold, and we're left there. And this one, I think the intention is we just flat out lose. Although I absolutely love Steve's idea, and especially seeing as how the film starts with the book being printed, and it ends with Neil watching his movie. I'm kind of buying into that a lot more now. That it was really just the book. But
it's the reality of the book.
Yeah, that's the reality of the book. But we're meant to lose there. So that's the way I take it. I take it as three individual works. That it's not a connected multiverse in the way that Stephen King works his own thing. or if it is, maybe one day Carpenter will give us his own Dark Tower and show us how his works are interconnected.
I think it would be an interesting horror movie to write sometime, where we sat down together and wrote, a short comic or a book or short stories or something about all the characters from our various states that we've written coming out and taking the revenge on the sick bastards who wrote their world.
It's kind of funny. I have on down the line, I kind of had this Grant Morrison-esque idea, and I didn't know he'd done this at the time before I started playing with the idea, but I have a scene in mind where like Mr. Happy confronts what I'm either going to call the creator or the artist. And it's essentially Mr. Happy is based on me, but the artist obviously stands in for me even closer to reality. And there becomes this this existential conversation about like you wrote all this crap. I'm always getting beat up by these bad guys. I'm like, yeah, but you also saved the day. And it's like, well, how am I supposed to live if I don't have any free will? It's like, and the artist is going to say like, hey man, for all I know, somebody's writing me. And they both stop and then they look out at the camera, and then they just like, yeah, best not to think about that though.
And out in the camera, SpongeBob with his magic pencil drawing. Steve, what do you think about that concept? Or about this idea?
Honestly, I think that it was intended to be a thematic trilogy. It wasn't meant to be a direct sequel or any kind of multiverse or anything like that. I think it was just, okay, these are three different visions of the end of the world that just happen to be tangentially related, because a lot of the same... Because Carpenter was involved with all of them, so you essentially get these ideas where you get this different threat that takes that attempts to take over the world, which by destroying identity, the thing, you have this whole otherworldly entity from science involving science we don't understand yet, which is Prince of Darkness, and then you have this entire Lovecraftian sort of element where you're literally writing the end of the world, and then it's an idea that destroys everything. So these are different types of threats. And I kind of like how it moves from straight Howard Hawksian science fiction with The Thing more to this very hard science fiction / horror with Prince of Darkness. And then you go from that straight into Lovecraftian gods and things like that. So there is a transitional element with genre that I think goes between the three movies as well, which I find really interesting. But do I think that there is any kind of connection between any of them? If you really want to work at it and you want to try to find pieces and you can want to try to make sense of it in your own headcanon because you think that that's fun, have at it. I don't think that was the intention, though.
I've got it. And it's coming from both of you. So, Steve, this is the world. We're living it through the characters in the world, but it's the world, it's the book. And The Thing and the Prince of Darkness are books in the series.
Why not?
So within the reality of fiction, all these things are happening because I like both your theories so much. Just jam them together.
Well, I do think that these probably aren't related at all. But like I said, I'm a writer and I'm a person who likes to think too much, and I like to toy with the idea and put it together.
I don't know if you've seen this postulated before, but there have been stories I've seen and trains of thought that like all of our fiction comes from us tapping into other realities, other strata of realities, and we're just repurposing other people's stories.
Yep. I will say this though: this movie right here, is absolutely real, and I am living it right now. This.
I have escaped from New York, but this is LA, Vato, and you're about to find out that this fucking city can kill anybody.
Exactly. So on that note, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you so much, Steve, for being here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is one of my favorite movies, so I love talking about it and can't wait to get into the next one we're covering.
And remember, this is LA, Vato. And this city could kill. Okay, anyway. Little LA Angelino pride there and being in the city that could kill anybody. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being here for this edition of Halloween Movie Madness.
Always a pleasure. I was glad to review this movie because this was my particular pick for the month of October. So awesome. I was really glad to discuss this. And do you read Sutter Kane?
Absolutely. So
then this will surprise you.
We are about to take off. But I will say the Halloween isn't ending in October this year. We're giving you a bonus episode. That's right. Next week, November 5th, we are going to be doing one more edition of Halloween Movie Madness for the year 2022. We're going to be talking about a movie that I know Steve hasn't seen. I can't wait till he sees it. The Exorcist 3.
Yes.
True sequel to the first Exorcist. I cannot wait.
Skip 2.
Skip 2. Just completely throw it away. Watch 3. And another great actor in that movie, George, among many, George C. Scott. Absolutely wonderful in that film. Absolutely incredible. So I can't wait to hear what Steve has to say about it. Can't wait to talk with you all about it. And then November will be Potpourri month. But I've already made an executive decision because I was having so much fun talking about John Carpenter here that on November 12th, we are going to do a movie I've wanted to do for a while, John Carpenter's Vampires.
Yes.
We're going to be talking vampires from John Carpenter. And then we will probably start getting a little bit into the holiday mode after that. But I think we got to hit that one. So next week, Exorcist 3, November 12th, John Carpenter's Vampires. Make sure you tune in here on Cinema Crusaders. And on behalf of myself and my co-host and the absent Lance Lucero, who I hope is doing well on his sound editing, we will see you next time on Cinema Crusaders. Keep that popcorn warm, everybody. We're out of here. See ya.